Have you ever been asked for something so completely over the top that you just instantly say no? Of course you have. But then, right after, a much smaller, way more reasonable request comes along. Well, that's no accident. It's a really powerful psychological trick, and today we are going to break down exactly how it gets you to say yes.
I mean, just think about it for a second. A total stranger wants you to commit to a massive, multi-year volunteering gig. You're going to say no, right? But then they immediately ask, well, could you just donate $5? All of a sudden, that $5 seems totally fine, easy even. So what's going on in that moment? You've just walked right into a classic persuasion tactic.
It's called the door-in-the-face technique, and the name is perfect, isn't it? Because that first huge request gets a big old door slammed right in their face. But here's the kicker. That slammed door is actually part of the plan. It's what sets the stage for the second, much smaller request, the one they really wanted you to agree to all along.
Now you might be thinking, wait, isn't this the foot in the door technique? Nope, it's actually the complete opposite. With foot in the door, someone starts with a tiny request to, get their foot in the door, and then they build up to something bigger. Door in the face flips that script entirely. You start big, you get that no, and then you pull back to the smaller thing you wanted from the very beginning.
Okay, but does this thing really work, or is it just a neat idea? Well, it absolutely works. Let's dive into the classic experiment that first put this whole technique on the map.
So, let's travel back to 1975. The legendary psychologist Robert Cialdini and his team came up with this really clever experiment. They wanted to see if they could prove, scientifically, that getting a no first could actually make it easier to get a yes later.
So here's what they did. They went to a group of people and hit them with that huge request. Hey, would you be willing to counsel juvenile delinquents 2 hours a week for 2 years? And, as you can probably guess, basically everyone said, no way. But right after that rejection, the researchers immediately asked their real question. Okay, well, how about just chaperoning them on a single trip to the zoo? For comparison, they asked other groups only for the zoo trip, without that big ask up front. And the result? It was wild. A full 50% of the people who first said no to the big request turned around and said yes to the zoo trip. Half of them. But to really get how huge that is, you have to see it next to the other groups. This chart just lays it all out. Look at that first bar. That's our door-in-the-face group at 50%. Now look at the group that was only asked about the zoo trip. Just 17% of them said yes. That is a massive difference. Getting that first no literally tripled the odds of getting a yes. The effect is it's undeniable. And hey, don't think this is some dusty old finding from the 70s. Social psychologists replicated this exact experiment in 2020, and yup, it turns out that almost 50 years later, the technique is just as persuasive as ever.
Okay, so we know it works, but the real question, the fun question, is why? What is going on in our brains that makes this simple trick so incredibly effective? Let's get into the psychology of it.
So there are two big theories that psychologists talk about. The first one is called reciprocal concessions. This basically says that we see the situation as a negotiation. The other person backed down from their huge request, so we feel this social pressure to meet them in the middle to make a concession of our own. The other idea is social responsibility. This one suggests we just have this built-in desire to be a good, helpful person, and that smaller, more reasonable request taps right into that feeling.
But wait, there's more. Other things are definitely going on too. For one, there's guilt. Let's be honest, saying no can make you feel kind of bad, right? So agreeing to the smaller thing is a super quick way to get rid of that guilt. And then there's self-presentation. We all want to look like a good, cooperative person to other people.
In fact, some research really zoomed in on this guilt factor and found it was a huge piece of the puzzle. The technique worked best when saying no to the first request was made to seem really unhelpful or even harmful, and saying yes to the second one was framed as being incredibly helpful. That mix of feeling guilty and then being offered an easy way out is a potent combination. Okay, so we've got the science down. Now let's talk about where this stuff pops up in our everyday lives. Where are you going to see this technique out in the wild?
The short answer? Pretty much everywhere. You'll see it in retail, in restaurants, in schools, with charities asking for money, on fundraising websites. Heck, it even works in virtual worlds. Once you know what you're looking for, you will start noticing it all the time.
You gotta love this example. In one study, a researcher in the Austrian Alps went up to people and tried to sell them 2 pounds of cheese. Most people said no. Then he immediately followed up by offering just 1 pound.
And what happened? Sales went through the roof compared to a control group that was only offered the £1 to begin with.
Now, this next one shows a really crucial part of the technique. Timing is absolutely everything. In a restaurant study, waitresses asked diners if they wanted a big dessert. When people said no, they immediately asked about getting a coffee or tea, and a lot more people said yes. But, and this is the key part, if they waited just 3 minutes before asking about coffee, the effect was totally gone. It has to be immediate.
And it's not just for adults trying to sell you stuff. This technique was found to be super effective at getting second graders to do more schoolwork. Researchers first asked them to do this giant 100-question worksheet. Of course, the kids said no. But when they were then asked if they just do 20 questions instead, a whole lot more of them agreed compared to other teaching methods.
Okay, let's bring it all home. We've seen the science, we've seen the real-world examples, so what's the big takeaway here? What do you need to remember?
It really just boils down to this. The door-in-the-face technique is so powerful because it's like a psychological triple threat. It taps into our need to negotiate, our desire to be a good person, and our need to get rid of guilt, all at the same time. That's a combination that is really, really hard for our brains to resist.
So, I'll just leave you with this little thought. The next time someone hits you with a big, surprising, maybe even kind of ridiculous request, and you say no, just take a pause and ask yourself, what are they really about to ask me?